All right, so this, of course, is the cover story tonight. And this is something that each one of you who's been watching the war unfold in Ukraine have been talking about. The Ukraine war, make no mistake, is redefining the world order. But what does it mean for the people of Ukraine? This is a question that has not been often asked. It may look obvious at first, but very few have said it in clear and unequivocal terms. What is unfolding in Ukraine is effectively the destruction of the Ukrainian nation as we know it. Headlines around the world have in fact focused on the meat grinder of a battle in Bakhmut. As things stand, the battle for Bakhmut could well be the defining moment in this war. And we'll of course talk about it in the next few minutes. But tonight on Gravitas, we want to look at Ukraine beyond this war. Now remember, every war will end. But the question, of course, is when will Ukraine's misery end and on what terms will the war end in Ukraine? At this very moment, China's President Xi Jinping has in fact put in play a pretty audacious diplomatic initiative which will create perhaps the first possible bridge between Moscow and Kiev, between Putin and Zelensky since the war began. We say possible since who can be certain in such uncertain times? We will see as to what happens, although the very fact that both Putin and Zelensky will of course be talking to Xi Jinping on the war raises some ray of optimism. But whatever happens, the question of course is this: what of Ukraine's future? Because remember, when we talk of war, we often forget that we are talking about people. Now, do you see green fields in Ukraine, or do you see a picture of devastation? Do you see prosperity, or do you see abject poverty? Do you see flourishing towns, or do you see towns that have been reduced to rubble, crippled adults and scarred children? These are two contrasting scenarios, and which one is likely to play out not just today, not just in 6 months from now, but for many years to come in Ukraine? Because no matter who wins the battle for Bakhmut or who wins the Ukraine war, the fact remains that the havoc that's been inflicted on Ukraine is not going to heal anytime quickly. And mark my words when I say this. This is an intergenerational conflict. This is not a conflict that will die down in this generation in Ukraine. This war will continue to haunt Ukraine for generations to come. And the question that must be asked is who is responsible for this? The general answer is likely to be President Putin of Russia because he launched the invasion. But is that the complete truth? Moscow believes that the war did not begin in 2022. It began when NATO, spurred by America, began expanding its borders to the boundaries of Russia and turned Ukraine into a cat's paw. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky must take a large share of the blame as well. It is in fact under his watch that Ukraine became a victim of what is essentially America's proxy war with its Cold War enemy. The Bakhmut, remember, is just one of the many tragedies that we've witnessed where the situation is simply becoming bloodier and bloodier by the day. The Wagner Group mercenaries captured this video of what they claim is Bakhmut. You know, this used to be an industrial town with a population of 72,000 people. There were salt refineries. There used to be wineries in this town. But all that's left of Bakhmut now are essentially just ruined homes, wrecked cars, and dead bodies scattered all over this ghost town.
Здесь у них в ангарах находились люди.
Thousands of people once lived in this town. Most of them have fled, and they've taken with them the future of Ukraine. Remember those words. The people who have fled from Ukraine are essentially the future of this nation. At least 8 million people have left Ukraine since the beginning of the war. And a majority of those who have in fact fled from Ukraine are young women and children. 8 million. Think about it. This is still a conservative number. Now, out of a population of 41 million, what remains of a country when almost about a quarter of its population is in fact gone? Now, what happens to those people who've stayed back? And what happens to their children? Russia is bombing schools, it's bombing play schools, children's hospitals. And just last week, remember, Russia dropped a 1,500-kilogram bomb in the city of Chernihiv in Ukraine. What is happening at this moment is that Moscow is increasingly normalizing the use of next-generation weapons in Ukraine. Now, last week we told you about the barrage of hypersonic missiles, such as the Kinzhal missile, that in fact was struck across cities in Ukraine. About 9 people died. But what's the guarantee that the next round of missiles won't claim more lives? Which brings me back to this question. What happens to the future of Ukraine and the Ukrainians who've now stayed back? So let's go back to Bakhmut. Ukraine has admitted the loss of at least about 200 Ukrainian soldiers who've died in Bakhmut in just the last couple of days. Now, this too would be an underestimate. Ukraine claims that the Russian casualty is much higher. At this moment, Ukraine says that for every Ukrainian soldier who is falling in Bakhmut, it is able to kill 7 Russian soldiers. But there's absolutely no way that anyone can confirm these numbers.
In less than a week, starting from 6th March, we managed to kill more than 1,100 enemy soldiers in the Bakhmut sector alone, which is Russia's irreversible loss. The loss right there, near Bakhmut. Furthermore, at least 1,500 more enemy sanitary losses, those whose wounds are incompatible with continuing the fight. Plus dozens of units of enemy equipment were destroyed. Plus, more than 10 Russian ammunition depots were burned down.
This war is not a question of who's killed how many. The fact of the matter is people are dying and the war is destroying Ukraine. Russia claims to have captured the eastern part of Bakhmut and also the outskirts in the north and the south. The Bakhmut will open the Donbas industrial region for Russia. The war is bleeding Ukraine's economy. In 2022 alone, the cost of war for Ukraine was almost about a third of its GDP. And today, a common Ukrainian is struggling to get even a simple hot meal, hot water, mobile network, internet. What Europe takes for granted has become an absolute luxury. And normalcy is just a long-lost dream for people in Ukraine. So the question, of course, is what's left? The people of Ukraine, a majority of the young crowd, has fled. The economy has been shattered. People are dying. The question is, why is Ukraine paying this high a price, and for whom? Is it for America's proxy war? Now remember, this is not the first time that the United States of America has fought a proxy war or has tried to topple a government. It did not want Zelensky, and Zelensky, of course, should have known better because America has got a track record of sorts to speak of. Iraq and Afghanistan are just 21st century examples. Did Zelensky play into Western hands? And now comes the real big question. Has Zelensky, who's made the West pay for the war with some brilliant PR, begun to realize that he must actually find a way out of the trap? Think about it. Is that why he's now responded to the Chinese initiative? If China succeeds in bringing the war to a halt, it will, of course, upturn all the strategic calculations that have been made in Washington and London and Brussels. Now, what happens next week when President Xi Jinping visits Moscow and then talks to Zelensky will, of course, tell us if the future will be different from the current scenario. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.